A warm and graceful afternoon to one and all. Welcome to ECVE, a e-learning platform for field veterinarian, Alembic initiative. Now I will like to invite Mr. P. Karunanidhi, Senior Vice President, Sales and Marketing, to introduce today's eminent speaker. Over to Karunanidhi, sir.
Good evening to all the field veterinarians. I am Karunanidhi from Alembic. I take great pleasure in introducing today's speaker, Dr. Abdul Samad sir. He is MSc Veterinary Medicine and PhD, with the PhD which he has done from Canada. He is an eminent scientist, researcher and consultant, and he is a former dean and the director of instruction from Maharashtra Animal and Fisheries Science University, Nagpur, Maharashtra. Dr. Samad sir is a stalwart, charismatic leader, excellent educationist, and an outstanding researcher. He started his career as a field officer, livestock development officer in 1976 and 77 at Animal Husbandry Department, Government of Maharashtra. And then he has joined in teaching profession as an assistant professor, College of Veterinary and Animal Science, Barbani in 78. So from 78 to 86, he worked as an assistant professor. Later, he got promoted as an associated professor in the same college. From 87 to 93, he worked as an associate professor. And then he became a professor of the same department in Bombay Veterinary College in the year 1994 until 2006. And he was a principal investigator and head of the Veterinary Nuclear Medicine Center between 2002 to 2013. And he is the person behind establishing India's first veterinary nuclear medicine center with the facility of whole body imaging. Dr. Samad has filed 6 patents pertaining to NDDS against human and animal diseases. The drugs developed against theileriosis, ehrlichiosis, and tuberculosis are currently being tested in the target animals. And once tests are over, it will be ready for marketing, which Dr. Samad sir is personally developing that. He was head of the Department of Veterinary Medicine and Veterinary Pharmacology and Toxicology between 2006 to 2010. So he was Dean, Bombay Veterinary College, 2006 to 10. And then, as I said earlier, that he was the Dean of Faculty of Veterinary Science and Director of Instruction at MAFSU, Nagpur, 2010 to 2013. Actually, Dr. Samad sir is a renowned expert in herd health, veterinary medicine and nuclear medicine with more than 40 years of experience. He is a pioneer in the field of institutional development, both at state and national perspective. Dr. Samad sir is an executive member or expert member in various committees. India's National Advisory Commission on Milk Production and Farmers Issues, established by the Indian Dairy Association, New Delhi. Research and Advisory Council of National Innovation Foundation, formed by Government of India to screen and validate traditional knowledge in animal health. And Dr. Samad was appointed as a leader of the group constituted by Government of Maharashtra for studying the use of information technology in improving livestock productivity and health. Dr. Samad sir has been recognized at international level by various institutes. He was honored by Commonwealth Fellowship to undertake PhD studies at Ontario Veterinary College in Canada. He received Canadian Fellowship Award for 3 years. His PhD work was presented at WHO, Geneva in 1990. Dr. Samad sir is known internationally for his extensive work on ICT application for veterinary science and delivery. He has visited various countries in pursuit of his professional career. So such an eminent speaker is today with us. Currently, doctor is doing various consultations to the farms as well as veterinarians across the country. So we are very happy to have such an eminent person. I am sure his presentation will enlighten our knowledge and it will help you to improve your field practices in coming months. Thank you very much. Over to Dr. Samath sir.
Thank you, Mr. Karunanidhi. Thank you very much, Santosh Shinde. Can you see the screen?
It has come, sir. Please go on slide mode.
Okay. Well, dear participants, fellow veterinarians, the faculty members from different, good afternoon to everyone. It's always a pleasure to get connected to the field veterinarians and other faculty members. And I think this digital mode has really facilitated us to get connected throughout the corner of the country. I know there are lots of webinars that are happening, and quite a few of them are really interesting with field application. There are eminent people who are giving webinars on topics of interest to the field veterinarians as well as to the farmers. And when Dr. Santosh approached me saying that he would like to have a webinar from me, and he wanted a suitable topic, I told him to wait for a day because I wanted to consider the right topic. And my whole idea was that since I'm still very active in research and development, and my area of research is to go through what is happening globally, screening the literature. I do attend lots of global conferences, listen to what new technologies are going on, and probably many people may not be knowing that for my PhD, it was something very interesting. I was placed in a sandwich program wherein the institute insisted that I should also learn chemistry, and the reason was, for the Commonwealth Fellowship I had applied under the subject chemistry and biochemistry, applied chemistry and applied biochemistry. But then I wanted to join a veterinary college and do PhD in my own subject. So they found out a way out that I could be registered in Ontario Veterinary College, and I could register in the Department of Veterinary Medicine. But then a professor from chemistry, biochemistry will also be enrolled as an adjunct professor in the department. And then I will be more involved research related with organosynthesis, because the whole idea was to develop new drug, synthetic new drugs, synthesize new approaches. The idea was to look at the metabolic pathways, find out what is a better target, how it is different than the mammalian pathway. So that was all, and I was doing a lot of chemistry. So I carried my chemistry knowledge to India, and continue to apply it in my in my research programs. So I thought a better option for me would be to give a presentation involving something which is coming up very in a very rapid way, and I know that is going to change the whole scenario of antibacterial therapy globally. So that's the reason I said I would like to talk on bovine mastitis, but with a slightly different focus, so that I can also give you what is happening globally when it comes to bacteria, antibacterial, antibiotic. So basically, I would be talking about the microbiome. Now, microbiome or microbiota basically, a whole community of the microflora or microorganisms which occupy the body, be it human or animal. And then I'll briefly, give you an idea as to how it is studied, because when we talk of, billions of, bacteria present all over the body, cavities, surfaces, everywhere, we are surrounded by billions of bacteria, how those, billions of bacteria can be studied. So what are different methods which are currently people are using? And then I'll focus on udder microbiome, because our topic is mastitis, and we would like to keep udder healthy, so that milk that comes out from udder is also of good quality and safe for the consumer. And then I'll slowly take you to the new paradigm on which I have been working since last 3-4 years. Wherein the paradigm is, if microbiome are so important, why touch them? Why disturb them? So can we have alternative technologies? So that is what I will be, presenting as to where we are and how these technologies have been developed, and whether those are really available for commercial exploitation, and how soon it will be in the hands of the Westerners. So there are few products that are that can be immediately made available to the vets, and there are few products for which they may have to wait for another 6 months or 1 year to be in their hand. And then I'll also talk about leaky udder management, because this is one problem which a lot of farmers and the vets keep on asking me as to what to do. The animal is not yet parturated, but the udder is full of milk. It's yet 8 days or 10 days to calve, or more than that, and then how the whole thing is to be managed. So I'll briefly mention about that. Now, microbiome. Now, as I have said, we are all covered with billions of bacteria, and if you go to YouTube, you'll find that the description of microbiome or microbiota. They'll tell you that as soon as a new calf or a new child is born, the moment it comes out of the uterus, out of the reproductive organ, in a few minutes it's all contaminated and surrounded by billions of bacteria. And mind well, these are not pathogenic bacteria we're talking about, but these are all the bacteria which become part of the body. So they are part and parcel of the animal body or the human body. So these are all large and diverse populations of bacteria, viruses, and fungi, and they almost occupy entire surface of human or animal body. So you can imagine that every inch, every centimeter of our body or animal's body is covered with microbiome, covered with different types of microflora. It is estimated that there are nearly 30 trillion bacterial cells living in each human being. You can imagine 13 trillion bacteria. And if you consider the number of cells in a body, then it is said that you have a ratio of, for each cell of human or animal body, you have one bacteria, one virus, or the fungi, which is available. So it's a huge population of, so people have started calling it as microbiota, and they're saying it is a community of bacteria. So it's a whole community of bacteria, and if you go through the literature, you'll find this community of bacteria are very active. I mean, they communicate with each other, through chemical signals. I mean, they have their own system of controlling their population, their growth. So it's a very intelligent kind of microbial community that is occupying our body. Exposure to microbes first occurs during birth, and later it is influenced by environmental factors. So initially, as soon as birth takes place, the conditions of the reproductive tract, and the moment it comes out, the ambient environment will decide what kind of bacteria are or what kind of microflora is going to be covered. But now there are also the research findings available which are suggesting that even diet would also decide, what kind of microflora, you would have on the body. So whatever we are doing, whatever animal body is being fed, depending upon the inputs, the microflora is going to change. And another important factor is exposure to antibiotic. So what we are always trying to do when we fight with infection is that we would like to take care of the pathogenic bacteria which has invaded, without really thinking that, when I'm killing one pathogenic bacteria, I'm also killing about 1 million or 1 billion good bacteria that are animals' friends or our own friends, because they are the first defense as far as the resistance is concerned. So lots of literature is now available on microbiome and microbiota, because the study of all these trillions of bacteria has become possible because of tremendous development that has taken place in DNA technology, sequencing. Then it has also been now confirmed that probably these microbiota could well become a kind of fingerprinting, because now scientists are finding out that there are individual specificities. There is a uniqueness. For example, suppose if I have my microbiota, probably this my microbiota, if it is not disturbed because of the antibiotics and because of the things, is very unique and typical to me. So it's like fingerprinting. They say it could be used. Now there is lot of research papers that are available, which are describing the importance of microbiome and the health. How health is determined because of the microbiome, or how microbiome contributes into health. Now when I'm talking about health, and I'm talking about health as an overall situation, or health of the udder, health of the reproductive tract, health of the oral cavity, or health of the nasal cavity. So all these cavities are now known to have a unique microbiota, and those are all have been studied. Initially, there were a lot of interest in study of microbiome with cancer, and there are enough papers available which suggest that the microbiome also decides the risk of cancer. And there have been papers suggesting that there is a relationship between the two, but since that is not my topic of presentation, so I'm not going to go into details, but I'm just trying to mention that there are active research groups globally which are looking at the microbiome and the especially their role played in cancer development. Then there are also studies which have been done where they have found that the understanding of the microbes has become important, because they're finding out that they play an important role in pathogenesis of certain diseases. For example, Helicobacter pylori, which is seen in human, causing gastric ulcers and acidity. It has been found that this particular bacteria is responsible for pathogenesis and allowing other pathogenic organisms to form ulcers and other kinds of pathogenesis. Skin microbiome again has been studied very extensively, and it suggests that these skin microbiome are protective, and if those are disturbed, especially when you are exposed to say infrared rays or ultraviolet rays or irradiation or other exposures, or even lots of use of cosmetics which is having germicides, then it results in exposure to cancer and other skin development. This is how the microbiome studies are done. The technique is called high throughput. And in high throughput technique, what is done is, you take a piece of, say, if suppose I'm interested in doing a study on teat skin microbiome, then I would take, a sample from, so a sample, which I would collect from the, teat skin. Or if I'm interested in teat canal, I can collect in teat canal. If I'm interested in mastitis, I can collect milk. See, the difference between current methods that are used and the old method is very radical difference. See, the old methods were always dependent on, bacterial culture. And when you culture, contamination with the environment at the time of sampling becomes a major issue. Whereas over here, it is not the culture, but it is basically the sequencing of the DNA. And the advantage here is the machine can take care of the sequencing of a very large number of bacteria, like any other genomic sequencing we do. So we feed the what we do is we feed the bacteria which have been collected from the skin or from any other organ, and that is fed to the machine, and machine will take it through different sequencing steps, and then and then based on the database which is there, it will be able to correlate the genomic sequencing of those bacteria with what is called as OUT, that is the operational taxonomic unit. And the details of the operational taxonomic units are is already there in the database. So it's a huge bioinformatic resource that is available, and using the bioinformatic analysis, the sequencing which has been the results of the genomic sequencing which has come from the machine is fed to the bioinformatics, and then they will able to it will be able to tell you exactly what is the type of the bacteria which is suspected, and basically it will also tell you the abundance, how abundant these are. I mean, what is the frequency of their occurrence, and depending upon the frequency of occurrence, you will be able to have a plot. For example, this is one plot, which is suggesting the auto use of different bacterial families. Now this I have given from cases of mastitis. So you can see there is milk which has come from healthy animal, milk which has come from infected animal, and then this is from healthy teat, and the other one has come from the infected teat. So you can see the vast difference. These are the more abundant kind of the microflora, and as you go down, these are the one where the frequency is going down, and you can see that there is a lot of variation you can see between the two, and these variations, and you can see these are the OTUs. I mean, the taxonomic units which have been converted into different kind of bacterial families, and these are the families which will tell you as to what is the frequency of these families of organisms you are collecting from there. And from this profiling, the researchers have now understood that there is a lot of variation in the deceased as well as in the non-deceased. And then they are also now trying to understand what happens if suppose if we give antibiotic for a longer period of time, what is going to happen, how this microbiome profiling is going to be different. So in short, what I am trying to convince you have to sit back and look at the clinical interventions we are doing. And this clinical intervention, when it comes to using antibiotics, antibacterials, germicides, we'll have to really think very seriously and balance it out, with the beneficial effects and the harmful effects. Whether whatever we are doing is, going to really benefit, because the pathogenic organisms are very serious, and that is a serious threat, and therefore I have to use antibacterial. But then think about, the commensals or the other microbiome which are good for me, wait for it to regain their multiplication, or somehow help them to regain the multiplication. So this is a dilemma which is being discussed globally in the research community as to know what exactly we should do. Now, as far as the mammary macrobiota is concerned, now there is enough literature available which says that mammary macrobiota are essential defense mechanism. Probably this is the first defense mechanism of the animal when it comes to mastitis. And therefore, if you are going to do anything, or we have a strategy where we are going to seriously disturb this microbiota, then probably we are also going to be having an adverse effect on the defense mechanism. So the hub species and foundational taxa that are associated with inflammatory status of the mammary gland or future incidences of clinical mastitis has already been studied. There are at least 40-50 papers I could access from different sources where they have studied the foundational, the taxonomic units of microflora and how those are getting disturbed throughout the lactation, and their differences between those which are at high risk and ultimately went into clinical or subclinical mastitis versus those which were healthy. So a lot of this information is available, and based on that, the scientists now they say that there is a microbiota homeostasis in the udder. So there is a fine balance between the commensal organisms, the beneficial organisms, as well as the pathogenic organism, and these are all living together very happily in a homeostatic mechanism. So let's say we have the pathogenic organisms like Streptococcus eubaris or Staphylococcus aureus or Corynebacterium, whatever we are talking about pathogenic bacteria. So those are all pathogenic bacteria. Now those pathogenic bacteria, along with billions of other or n number of families of other bacteria, with n numbers of bacteria are living together very happily. And whenever this homeostasis is developed, homeostasis is disturbed, then the pathogenic organisms will take upper hand and then will cause the disease. So therefore, the homeostasis disturbance is one of the very attractive area of investigation when especially in the area of metritis, in the area of pneumonia, in the area of mastitis, in the area of gastrointestinal infections. So for all these cavities where you are expecting large number of organisms, microbiota, the role played by microbiota is gaining a lot of importance. There are commensal microbes which are inhibiting teat apex. All along we were thinking that probably it is the teat sphincter, which is a major defense for invasion or for entry of bacteria. But now there are papers which are suggesting that along with this sphincter, there are also commensal organisms which are present on the teat sphincter as well as teat canal, and they are the one which will determine whether the teat canal is susceptible for new intramammary infections or the invasion of the pathogens. For instance, certain non-aureus Staphylococcus staphylococci and Corynebacterium species colonizing the teat apices and teat canals of dairy cows have the ability to produce a wide range of bacteriocins, and their checking of multiplication of other bacteria, as I have said, that they communicate with each other through chemical signals, and one of the signals which have been found is bacteriocins. So these are the bacteria which will produce bacteriocins, and they will ensure that the pathogenic organisms are not going the beyond threshold to disturb the homeostasis. And therefore, the foundational species increase the diversity of the ecosystem and make it more resilient against invasion by exogenous species. So when you have diversity of these bacteria, when you have them in good number to have homeostasis, they will not allow invasion of other bacteria into their ecosystem, and that's how they will be able to they will be able to create an environment where the organisms do not develop. Now, after going through, now you will realize that what we have been doing since last so many decades. So, for example, we have been using germicidal T-tip. So, how come all along we were saying that germicidal T-dip was the best strategy for controlling mastitis or subclinical mastitis? we have been using, dry cow therapy, consisting of the antibacterials or antibiotic. You're talking of a slow release antibiotic, which is released for, say 30 days, 45 days, so that, intramammary infections are taken care of. So, there is also another school, which is debating on all these aspects. And specifically, I'm showing you one more slide here, which is differentiating between the mucosal surface and the mammary gland epithelium. See, all our other canals, like gastrointestinal tract, nasal tract, the nasopharyngeal tract, the vaginal tract, or the reproductive tracts, they all have mucosal surface. And when there is a mucosal surface, the type of interaction with the bacteria or the microflora is going to be different. And it has been all along said that the presence of mucosa is the one which is responsible for inhibiting the entry of bacteria into the cells. Whereas if you look at the mammary gland epithelium, you find there is no such mucosal lining active, which is actively secreting mucin or such kind of. So therefore there is a debate which is going on, wherein it is being suggested that for as far as the udder health is concerned, the role of microbiota has to be really considered, because you don't have a mucosal surface, and therefore we are going to have a lot of disturbances if you are using antibacterial. The issue is all these things were being used in Western countries, and we know that in Western countries the cow will remain in the barn, lactating cow will remain in the barn for a very short period of time. See, for example, now the data has come from USA and from Canada, where they're saying that the average length of stay of a cow in the barn is hardly less than it's less than 3 lactations. So by that time there are new improved heifers that are available, so those are replaced, or these cows will develop some kind of problem, and they will end up in the meat industry. And therefore the long-term effect of the use of the germicidal use of those teat dips as well as the teat sealants was not really visible. So there is also another side of the story in which I wanted to tell you that there is also discussion going on whether whatever has been said is really correct or not. One more area of research that has come, and which is really opening up the industry to think of using the microbiota for the milk quality as well as the milk product quality. There are interesting papers which I read, and those interesting papers describe that the cheese shelf life, the cheese quality, and the taste of the cheese is largely dependent on the microflora which are contracted from teat skin. And they have gone through the tracking system where they have been able to demonstrate the commensal organisms which were present on the teat skin of cows coming into milk, and then from milk they are getting into the fermentation process, and from the fermentation process they have come into the into cheese. So all that traceability of all these organisms has already been, and there are quite a few papers, and those who are interested can read those papers from the Google, or if you write to me, I'll be able to share those papers with you. Now I think the same thing is going to happen in other kinds of fermentation products like Shrikhand, Dahi, etc., where these microbiomes, which are there either on the either in the teat canal or outside on the teat skin, would be contributing to the quality. And therefore now there is a suggestion that the milk quality or the cheese quality that is coming out from those cows where the germicidal teat dip is being used is of a lower quality than those cows where germicidal and teat dip is not being used, or some kind of those salt kind of teat dip, if it is being used, which is not so germicidal, that the quality is going to be improved. Or those cows where no teat dip was used but sufficient hygiene was maintained, it has been found that the quality of cheese is extremely good. So if we are adopting this technology of maintaining the homeostasis of udder, it's going to benefit not only the cow but also the consumers, because the quality of the product which you are going to make is going to be much better quality. Now the question is, when microbiota becomes pathogen, as I have said, that there are lots of pathogenic organisms also which are residing on the skin. And generally what happens, the shifting of a pathogen from its normal habitat to a new habitat triggers the invasion, because the organism, suppose for example, there is E. coli which is there on the skin. Now this E. coli on the skin is not pathogenic, but the moment it enters into the teeth canal, it comes into a different kind of microenvironment, and there it becomes virulent. Same thing is happening with lots of other bacteria. They may not be pathogenic outside, but the moment they enter into nasopharyngeal tract or onto the lungs, or there are organisms which are there in the intestine, but the moment they come out on the peritoneum, they become pathogenic. So the entry of bacteria or the invasion of bacteria from its normal habitat to a new habitat is the major trigger of these becoming pathogen. So that is the fundamental difference. That anything which is, say for example, the normal predilection site is teeth sphincter, and if it is getting into teeth canal, then it is going to become venomous. If it is going from outside the skin of the teeth getting into the teeth canal, then it is going to become pathogenic. Or organisms which is there in the teeth canal going into the alveoli is likely to become pathogenic. So this is what is now understood, that the invasion of organisms from one habitat to another habitat is the major triggering mechanisms for these becoming pathogenic. So picking up this this particular fact, that the when bacteria enter into a any other new habitat, they become pathogenic. So around this we started developing a technology which is called as barrier technology. And the whole idea was here that can we prevent invasion of bacteria into a new site. And fortunately, if you look at the body of a cow, you will see that the route of entry of bacteria would be either, say, if it is a cow, it's going to be the sphincter and teeth canal, that is one. Then the vagina, or the reproductive tract, the opening of the reproductive tract, that is another port of entry. Then one more port, nasopharyngeal region, and then oral cavity. Now in oral cavity, now there is enough evidence available that when we talk of oral cavity, whenever we used to talk about the oral infection which is going through feed, fodder, consumption of these, now it has become very clear that probably this route of entry when we talk of orally is nasopharynx and not especially the gastrointestinal tract to a larger extent. There could be some organisms which might be able to go through the pepsine, the acidity of the gastrointestinal tract, and the trypsin and the chymotrypsin. Because remember, the whole gastrointestinal tract is a very hostile environment. Now when it can hydrolyze food, it can hydrolyze cellulose in case of cows, and break down everything, all these bacteria are also going to be treated accordingly. And therefore there is a school which thinks that the entry of the bacteria from the oral cavity is from the nasopharyngeal region. So coming down to how this whole concept can be applied to control mastitis and to treat mastitis is that if we can have a gatekeeper. Let's say, for example, sphincter is the gate through which the organisms are able to enter into the teeth canal, and from there into the other tissue and become pathogenic and cause mastitis. That becomes our one gate through which the organisms are going to pass. There could also be possibility of bacteria coming through blood into the mammary tissue, but again that coming into blood is going to be from some other route only, because it can come only through the port of entries. And as I have said, there are only few port of entries through which organisms or bacteria can enter. So if we are able to take care of these gates through which bacteria is going to enter into the body, then probably we are going to take care of the invasion of these pathogenic organisms becoming virulent and causing disease. So this becomes then a very simple answer, that what I am doing is I'm not allowing anything unwanted or any unwanted bacteria to enter into a new site without disturbing the microbiota. And therefore, therefore, this kind of technology, which is called as barrier technology, is going to be helpful in case of mastitis. So antibiotic, antibacterial, and chemicals alter microbiota, and therefore they are also going to disturb the normal organisms which are beneficial. Then intramammary formulations, TD, dry cow therapy, intrauterine, intravaginal, we keep on giving lots of antibacterial, intrauterine, without thinking that we are also destroying other good organisms. And again, in case of cows, there are a lot of literature available wherein they have demonstrated that the microbiota of even reproductive tract is very important. And if those are disturbed, then animals become highly susceptible for endometritis as well as metritis. So as against this, if we are not disturbing the microbiota, but still we are taking care that organisms coming from other side into a new site is prohibited, then we are going to have a kind of control over this disease. So we have developed a polymer based formulation. So what we have done is, for example, if this is the teat canal, then what we have thought that if I can put a gate here, a barrier here, and this barrier should be such that it should not allow bacteria to enter into teat canal, but should not create any other problem, like it should allow oxygen to enter, so that there is no anaerobic environment I unnecessarily create, and then it is such that it will not be disturbed, and it will not get disturbed because of the normal activity of the cow. Then I have a solution here, because then I have put a gate, and this gate I will remove only at the time of milking, and then after milking I will close this gate, and then the organisms will not be able to get into. Same thing can happen even with the vaginal tract. Same thing can happen with the nasal tract as well as nasopharyngeal tract, where if I can have a spray or here a kind of a solution if I inject, and if that is able to coat the entire endometric epithelium and does not allow entry of bacteria, the problem of metritis can be solved. So this is the basic concept on which we started our work last 3 years. I think some of these findings have also been presented by Dr. Mala Menon in one of the other webinar, because Dr. Mala Menon has been my collaborator from Bombay College of Pharmacy, wherein I give them the basic concepts, and we together then develop the formulation, and we test this formulation in the field. Now this is one technology which we have recently completed. It's a teat dip, post milking teat dip. Now usually post milking milking teat dips are the one which is germicidal. You have iodine, or you have those salts which will kill bacteria. Now what we have is a basic polymer, and this basic polymer as soon as it is applied to the teat, because of the temperature of the teat and another the chemical which we use, it forms a thin film, and it's a very uniform film. The characteristic of this film is that its pore size is less than 0.2 micron. So we have done electron microscopy, and we have found that the pore size is less than 0.2 micron. And when the pore size is less than 0.2 micron, then bacteria cannot enter. Now another thing which we have done over here is, since if I'm applying a teat dip to a cow, cow is going to sit, cow is going to remain active, move around, and therefore the film should not be disturbed. So we have used a novel technology called reinforcement technology. So wherein we have added another polymer which reinforces the earlier polymer so that it becomes quite strong, and then it doesn't get disturbed, you know, with the activity of the animal. Now, how do we test it? Now, for that, what we have done, we developed an in vitro model, and this is what, you know, I learned in Canada, that, you know, to develop rapidly and, you know, have your controlled environment for development of the formulation, you must have an in vitro model, because going to animal and doing any study becomes very difficult, ethical, all kinds of, you know, ethical permissions you need. Then there are, you know, individual variations which you cannot control, but if you can have an in vitro model, you can control everything. So what we did, we developed a rubber based teat dip. So it's a teat dip type, but it's a rubber kind. We just put a nick so that it mimics the sphincter, and then we can apply, you know, our polymers, form a film, and then, you know, study the characteristic of the film. So this is how the in vitro model was developed. And now I can put this in vitro model into, say, a bacterial culture and check whether there would be you know, entry of bacteria. And for that, what I need to do is simply put some kind of you know, a bacterial culture, you know, culture solution in which bacteria will grow, or some kind of, you know, agar gel stub, you know, where the bacteria after entry, you know, would go, and then, you know, I would be able to see whether the bacteria have entered or not. So it becomes a very simple kind of technology to ascertain whether the polymer is, you know, is being active or not. Another in vitro test which we have done is, you know, we took a simple you know, petri dish on which we have a nutrient agar, and on the nutrient agar, then, you know, you can spray the, you know, teat dip solution, and after that, you know, put a filter paper, and on a filter paper, you know, you can on a filter paper you can put bacteria and incubate it, and afterwards you can find whether the, you know, bacteria have gone through the filter paper and there is a culture colony behind it. So it becomes, you know, a very easy way to you know, study the, you know, barrier technology. And this kind of a teat dip, which is a post milking teat dip, is, you know, we call it Baridip, is a novel aqueous product based on ion dependent polymerization. It's very rapid because it's an ionic polymerization. It polymerizes very fast. Since it does not have any you know, germicidal activity, and therefore you know, you don't have any disturbances in the microbiota. But since it is a barrier film, it will not permit the, you know, bacteria you know, entering into it. Although it is water soluble, as I have said in the beginning, but once it gets polymerized and forms a reinforced film, then it becomes water resistant. That means, you know, that means it's a hydrophobic. So even if animal is sitting in water, you know, it will not get disturbed. So this is a, you know, technology which we have developed using the barrier type, and the advantage here is that it is not germicidal, but it is not allowing bacteria to enter into the teat canal. This is you know, again, technique, you know, which I have just explained to you, where, you know, we use this technique to demonstrate the efficacy of the barrier film. So I'll not you know, go into details of this. Now, again, using the same technology, you know, we have also developed a dry cow therapy, because, you know, if you want to control mastitis, you have got, you know, two major tools, you know, in your hand. One tool is that, you know, use teat dipping after milking, so that, you know, you have the load of pathogenic bacteria are reduced. That is one. And number two is, you know, dry cow therapy. Because in most of the Western countries, subclinical mastitis is not treated. Subclinical mastitis testing is done only to find out if there is a problem. And high somatic cell count or a large number of cases of subclinical mastitis will tell you that, you know, there is an issue, and that issue need to be sorted out. So with that hint, you know, find out what is the type of organisms that are involved, and based on that, you would like to start your mastitis control program from dry cow. The reason why subclinical mastitis is not treated is because of presence of milk. Now, if you're giving anything in the presence of milk intramammary, it's not going to be effective, because there will be flushing of whatever you have you know, infused into the teat canal because of the milk flow. Number two, it is going to be there in huge quantities in milk, you know, which will contaminate milk. And therefore, the subclinical mastitis or any treatment of at the time of lactation for subclinical mastitis is not really preferred in most of the countries. Treatment is carried out only in case of clinical mastitis. But then the other issue which you need to handle then is how to take care of intramammary infections. And the new intramammary infections usually take place during the dry period. And now during the dry period, there are two ways through which the the bacteria can enter. Number one is residual bacteria which is there. For example, staphylococci infection or certain intracellular bacterial infections of the mammary tissue. There will be remnants or residues which will still be there intracellular, which you have not treated. And because we have not treated, they will remain. And then once the animal becomes dry, then there is no flushing. See, like in lactating animals, taking out milk, say for example, if I'm taking out 15 liters of milk daily, that 15 liters of milk is also flushing all kinds of pathogenic bacteria which are there. And therefore the load of bacteria during lactation is going to be less compared to if there is pathogen which is present during the dry period. So during the dry period, because there is no flushing, the bacteria will start multiplying. That is one area from where the bacteria would take an upper hand. And therefore it is largely held that dry period of the cow is a major risk period, and lots of new intramammary infection is likely to be introduced during the dry period, and then that will be expressed at by the time animal comes into lactation after the parturition. So dry cow therapy is a major is one of the important strategy of controlling mastitis in many countries. Of course, in India, dry cow therapy is not still popular. There are one or two companies which are marketing dry cow therapy, but again that is only a slow release kind of drug, which is again germicidal, antibacterial. So it is going also to disturb the microbiota, as I have said earlier. So we have come up with a dry cow therapy, which is again based on the barrier type. The technology here used is what is called as Sol-Gel. Now in this Sol-Gel technology, what happens, your formulation is like solution outside, but once it comes in contact with the tissues and at the body temperature, it becomes a gel. And this gel is such that it is not dissolved; it remains for a very long period of time. We have demonstrated that it remains up to 45 days. By tracking, by using some other mechanisms, we have shown that it remains for about 45 days, and it also acts as seal because the gel or the polymer is having pore which is not more than 0.2 micron, so it's not going to allow entry of the bacteria inside. So we call it green type of teat sealant, where you can infuse at the time of drying off, let it polymerize for 10-15 minutes, and then you can leave the animal, and then the seal remains for a very pretty long period of time. So this is another product which has been developed, which is not having any antibacterial or germicidal property, but it's a barrier type where the bacteria are not allowed to enter into the site where they could produce infection. This is the radiographic evidence of the the green teat seal which we have developed. Here what we did, because otherwise our formulation is not radio opaque. So what we did, we developed nano bismuth particles, and that's nano bismuth particles where it's a radio opaque. So and we incorporated that into our formulation, and we gave it intramammary and then took a photograph. So you can see that it remains there, and we have done it for 36 hours radiography, and we found that it was still there. And from other experimentation, we have found that it would remain for about 45 days, and that is an enough period to prohibit the entry of the bacteria. So this was all I wanted to talk to you about the microbiome, as well as the new technology which has been developed around this new concept. Then I would like to speak, about the leaky udder for some time, and then maybe I'll stop here and then take questions from the audience and try to answer if they have any issues related with even if it is treatment, etc. Please feel free to ask me the questions. Now, as far as the treatment of mastitis is concerned, those vets, because I'm quite active and I have done I do a lot of consultancy also. For example, in Chitle dairy, we have done an elaborate study where I could convince the the practitioners, the the paravets and others who are, as well as the farmers, that using antibiotic and a huge or a third generation antibiotic every time may not be really very useful. So I told them to try out one of the strategy and you can ask those people and they will vouch for it that it works. And the strategy is, if you have clinical mastitis which is very severe, where milk is totally become like straw, it's a watery, there is inflammation of the udder, huge inflammation of the very painful udder, I do only two things. Number one, I say apply cold sponge. So if you apply cold sponge, that is the best anti-inflammatory. So you'll find immediately the redness and the swelling of the udder will go down. So you can take the ice cubes that are there, roll it in a muslin cloth and just wrap on the udder for some time. Even if you have swelling, inflammatory swelling on the teeth, you can wrap it and you'll find it will immediately cool down and the pain will also go down. And another thing I tell them that you remove milk 4 to 5 times. Now the idea here is all exudate, all noxious material, inflammatory material containing lots of bacteria is accumulated in udder, and we would like to get rid of that. Even if there are bacterial toxins, you should get rid of. So much that even if the animal is really painful, I ask them to give oxytocin also, so that I can empty entire udder and take out entire milk. That by itself is 75 to 80% of the treatment in severe cases of mastitis. Then if you feel that the infection is quite severe, animal is having fever, there is bacteremia or septicemia, then you can give treatment. And there I always prefer treatment in case of mastitis parenteral and not intramammary, for simple reason that intramammary administration has to be done very carefully. There are two things which you need to do. One is while administering anything intramammary, you are able to restrain the animal properly. You are able to maintain the hygiene properly, and that you are not damaging the teat canal by unnecessarily fighting with an agile animal. And number two, you are also not contaminating. So if you are able to take care of that, I have no issue as far as intramammary is concerned. But in case of clinical mastitis, if there is inflammation, that inflammation also becomes difficult for the dispersion of the drug, and that is the reason I prefer a parenteral injection of antibiotic. If at all I would like to give an antibiotic, I would prefer a parenteral administration of antibiotic rather than intramammary. And another factor I consider is if more than one teat is involved, I would definitely go for parenteral therapy and not intramammary therapy, thinking that the involvement of more than one teat is actually suggestive of a systemic infection also, and therefore it is very likely that the other two teats would also be affected to some extent, maybe subclinically, and therefore if I give a systemic or a parenteral injection, it will reach to all the 4 quarters and the infection will be treated. So this is one thing which I always do. Number two, if you want to use anti-inflammatory, do it it should be administered quite fast. And I always tell practitioners that your anti-inflammatory should be very strong, because here you don't want fibrosis. The problem of fibrosis and losing of the quarter becomes imminent if you are approaching the acute mastitis cases late. And while doing that, before focusing on the bacteria or the type of bacteria, I would tell practitioners to focus more on inflammation, so that inflammation and pain, so that lot of other inflammatory materials which is going to cause fibrosis is not coming over there. So that is one thing which I would always advise. And as far as the leaky udder is concerned, my approach is always that if there is milk in udder or colostrum in udder, remove it, because having milk over there is going to cause two problems. Number one, milk is a very good source of bacterial growth, so therefore you'll have lots of growth of other bacteria. Number two, milk in the alveoli or in the teeth system is going to have a feedback mechanism, and therefore further synthesis of milk may be disturbed, and therefore the secretion of prolactin and other hormones may be disturbed. So I would say, okay, remove if it is colostrum, freeze it so that when the calf is born, you can feed it. And another approach, if you feel that there is still enough time, 10 days or 15 days for the cow to calve, then in that case you can even think of termination of pregnancy, because termination of pregnancy 15 days or 21 days prior to the expected date of parturition is not going to be harmful. All you need to do is use drugs like betamethasone, dexamethasone, 40 milligram, 80 milligram, and then after 48 to 72 hours you can induce normal parturition, and then milk and other things become normal. So this is what I usually do it. And number two, the major cause of leaky udder is the body condition score because of overfeeding during dry period. So therefore make sure that the body condition score doesn't go beyond 3.75 1 month prior to parturition. And therefore if that is so, you have to cut down on concentrate feeding if you are doing, cut down on the energy if you are giving lots of energy, and then after you can reduce, and then slowly you can increase by the time it reaches the parturition. I think with this I think I have completely covered most of the things. And one more thing I would like to add here. This is my some of the last slides, that I always give a lot of importance to housing when it comes to udder infections. All those cases where you have cement concrete, you have lots of humidity, dung always accumulated, animals are tied, animals are sitting on the dung and urine all the time, you cannot control mastitis here. For controlling mastitis, the barn should be dry, the animal should not sit on the humid climate, and therefore it should not enter into teat canal. So I always tell farmers to go for loose housing where you don't tie animals. You can look at these animals' hygiene. They are very clean. It's an earthen floor. You don't have to spend a lot of money over it. And people who have done it, they will tell you that for months they don't have any case of mastitis. They don't have to treat case of mastitis. You can go to Satara, Sangli, Kolhapur, and all those areas where people have adopted this kind of housing system. I think it's a major intervention if you would like to control mastitis. So this is all I wanted to convey today, and I would welcome any questions if there are people would like to.
Thank you, sir. Now I will request Dr. Naresh Kulkarni to display the questions.
Yes, sir.
So that sir can read and answer.
Yes, sir. I'm sharing. Is my screen is visible, sir?
I would like to.
No, not visible. Talk.
Yeah, I'm not able to.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Still not visible, doctor.
I would like to stop my sharing first.
Okay, sir.
Now you try. No, already talked, sir. I talked from my side.
Okay.
You can display now, please.
Yeah. Is it visible, sir?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, sir, there are few questions pertaining to the management as well as to the treatment aspect as well, and few questions regarding these polymers and green tea devices.
And what may be the best flooring pattern in tropical to minimize mastitis? Okay, Dr. A.K. Singh, I prefer if suppose it's an organized farm having say 20-50 animals, I would prefer a mixed kind of housing system, especially the flooring. I'm not a proponent of cement concrete floor. For simple reason that a lot of labor involved, because you have to keep on cleaning 24 hours. There are very good methods available for earthen flooring. If you look at if you go to Google or you can contact me, I can give you those compendiums which has been developed by FAO for flooring systems in case of tropical climate, and most of those suggest earthen floor. The only problem with earthen floor is that you have to invest in that. Earthen floor does not mean कि लाया उसको जो जमीन है उसके ऊपर खड़ा कर दिया. I mean, it's not that. You have to invest, like you have a earthen road in the villages when you prepare. So you do a preparation. That means you excavate it 2 feet or 3 feet. Then you put stone, bricks, and other things, and then on the top of it you have to have some kind of surfacing. Once you do that, then your earthen floor becomes very strong. But still you need to take care of it every 6 months or 8 months. You have to do some kind of, but then you are saved from lot of all these issues. The labor problem will be solved. So personally, I would always prefer an earthen floor. But if it's a big farm, there I tell people to have a cement concrete kind of stay area near the manger, so that because when animals are eating, that is the time they also defecate and urinate. So that area becomes more wet, if it is earthen. So that area can be of cement concrete, and the other paddock area should be, straightway earthen floor. If it is a high rainfall area, you can put a whole kind of, roof over it. If it is not a high rainfall area, then you don't have to worry about. If it's a high rainfall area, you can still have floor, which could be laid with perforated pipes. I had done that in Bombay Veterinary College in my own number 22 unit. We had developed this kind of housing system for 5,000 rupees, 10,000 rupees, 25,000 rupees with the help of our labor only. So that is what I prefer. The second question is how to treat for fibrous udder. Oh, very difficult question. As far as teat is concerned, there are some teat slitters available. So you can open those fibrous area and open the teat canal. And you can also keep some kind of material inside. Those are available, stellate type, which will again not permit the fibrosis again to come back. And majority of the time teat fibrosis is because of the faulty milking machine or the faulty technique of milking. So that needs to be attended to. When it comes to fibrous udder, once it is fibrous, it's very difficult to reverse that fibrotic process, because fibrosis is part of healing. It's a healing process where the inflammation cannot be healed with the normal physiological or biological tissue. It is being filled in by fibrosis, so it becomes very difficult. There are people who suggest that using enzymes and other things. I have never found it useful in my practice. Dr. Mukesh Veranwal, hardy disposition in the udder canal and collagen deposited inside udder in case of mastitis. Why is it so? These are all collagen and all these fibrotic material. These are part of inflammation response. If you read the chapter on inflammation, you'll find that inflammation is the greatest insult a body would recognize. As soon as there is inflammation, the whole army is there to repair it. So you'll have recruitment of lots of inflammatory cells, lot of chemicals which are being diverted to the inflamed tissue so that it is repaired. And these are all collagen deposition, etc., are part of the inflammation response. Sometimes it is an over-inflammatory response, so you have collagen which is deposited in higher quantity or fibrotic material. So to take care of that, you have to do two things. Number one, attend to cases of clinical mastitis where there is severe inflammation very fast. And number two, you can use anti-inflammatory agents at that point of time. But once it is there, then only surgical intervention you'll have to do. Even if you find that there is a space occupying lesion in teat canal, you have to remove it surgically. Post mastitis and infectious disease animals usually take more time to regain its productivity. Kindly share your expert opinion to restore normal milk production earlier. Okay. Again, this is something where the vets need to have patience, as well as the farmer also needs to have patience. Udder has gone through a major insult of inflammation. It has suffered from a disease, and therefore recovery is going to take time. So therefore we should also alert farmer that, okay, it has been done. Now you have to wait for 7 days, 10 days, 15 days for the recovery. Number two, once there is mastitis, that quarter is not going to regain optimum productivity. There will be compromise, at least in that lactation, and the farmer needs to be ready for that. And number two, as I have said, look for complete treatment. Don't give treatment haphazardly and only temporarily, because if it is a staph kind of infection, that is an intracellular infection, and therefore you will have to give antibiotic or antibacterial if you would like to give for at least 5 days to 10 days. It should take very longer period of time. Otherwise, some residual infection will always remain. Then the other thing is giving some high energy feed and other kind of things also you can try. But that is something which is related organically. So therefore anything which is going to stimulate like prolactin secretions and galactogog extra theoretically is not going to be really helpful. But usually it takes about 10 to 15 days for recovery to happen if we have done correct kind of treatment. Then Dr. Sudhir Pothuru, ABST is the good choice for selection of antibiotic, but in most of the instances it is not possible to send milk samples for antibiotic sensitivity. Kindly suggest alternative methods. Okay. Now when I was doing PhD, I had also taken courses in epidemiology, and you must have read the epidemiology book by Wayne Martin. So the epidemiology course I had taken was under Wayne Martin. And there, during the discussion, and whenever we used to talk about epidemiology of mastitis and what kind of strategies we should take, there was always one point which was mentioned very prominently, and that was one should not go for individual antibiotic sensitivity test when it comes to treatment. And the basic reason is when you are culturing bacteria, it's not going to be one pathogenic colony only. It is always contaminated no matter what you do. There would always be number of colonies. And then it will all depend on the wisdom of the microbiologist who is handling the milk, which colony he picks up. That colony may not be associated with mastitis, but he will give you the antibiotic which is sensitive to for that colony or for that bacteria. And for that reason, it was all the time emphasized that antibiotic sensitivity is to be avoided as a routine unless and until you have a very good microbiologist who can think of associating the bacterial colony with the mastitis, and who is extremely sure that this is what has happened, or where you have done treatment with antibiotic, number of antibiotics you have used, and still you are not able to get any results. At that point of time, if you want to do antibiotic sensitivity, it is all right. But routinely antibiotic sensitivity tests should be done, but not for the sake of picking up the type of antibiotic. Now the whole antibiotic profile of the year or months need to be collated to understand what is the profile of the pathogen and what is the profile of antibiotic sensitivity, and that will decide what should be your first preference of antibiotic treatment for mastitis, second and third treatment strategy. So for that particular purpose, you can use antibiotic sensitivity test. Next, please.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. There are few questions more on the next slide. Yeah. regarding the diagnostic tool at the field level, kindly suggest the field
Kindly
level test
suggest
to
field
detect.
level test to detect mastitis versus easily available inputs and how reliable it is. The SURF field mastitis test. Okay, you see, mastitis test is quite reliable for detecting subclinical mastitis in cows. Okay, it is not reliable in buffaloes. That is what is our finding. I have done a lot of work on, California mastitis test in case of buffaloes, as well as I've done it, with that De Laval somatic cell counter, as well as direct somatic cell count. Now we have found in case of buffalo, somatic cell count is under 100,000. Okay, compared to cows where it is, 500,000, 600,000. So California mastitis test works, if it is properly calibrated, works extremely well in case of cows. The only thing is some institute, need to say cutoff levels, and calibrate the gel formation with that cutoff level. Now in USA and in Canada, I know there are mastitis, association, or, they are having societies which will do, update on the threshold levels of somatic cell count. So for example, if 3 years back it was 250,000, they may come out with 350,000 as a threshold level at some point of time. And based on that, the CMT is calibrated, if at all they do. Generally now they don't do CMT because they have got somatic cell count. But if you want to do somatic cell count, this, you'll have to collaborate with the threshold level. Don't do it in case of buffaloes. It's not very reliable. There are other tests like, pH test or, those kind of tests. I have found, those have very low sensitivity and specificity. And number two, in case of, you want to do subclinical mastitis, and after subclinical mastitis, you would like to find out, what is the bacteria which is involved, so that you can have a strategy of dry cow therapy and strategy of treatment of clinical mastitis, and also find out, how many of subclinical becomes, clinical mastitis. So this is an exercise for which usually subclinical mastitis and subclinical mastitis testing is not done, as I have told you, for treating subclinical mastitis. So if that is, your objective, then the best method I would do is direct cell count. You can use Neubauer's chamber, and you can do counting of the somatic cells in Neubauer's chamber like you do for leukocyte. What is the economic management of mastitis for rural areas, livestock farmers? Oh, it's number one. It's a number one problem. Recently, I analyzed data of around 300,000 treatment of mastitis cases. Because there are lots of organizations which are using my Herdman software. So they also enter, the disease data as well as the treatment data. So I keep on analyzing, and I have found that 80% of the antibiotic administration in field is for treating mastitis, other infections. So you can imagine, if you are able to control mastitis, how much of farmers' money we will be able to control. And then there are lots of animals, which will go off milk. If there is subclinical mastitis, we know that around 15 to 20% milk will be compromised. So you can imagine, 1 million cows, which are into milk, and 20% of their, milk, if you are able to save by controlling mastitis, you will be increasing your milk production by 20%, without doing anything, and then saving, the cost of treatment, etc. So it's a huge. I think, there must, the government of India and the policymakers, should give lot of importance to mastitis control. But the problem is mastitis control is not something which is a magic wand. Ek stick liya, ghuma diya, mastitis control. It requires a lot of inputs, right from housing, milking technique, and then hygiene. So there are a lot of things that are involved. But dairy cooperatives and milk processors, I think, should participate in that. Please suggest a guideline to prevent mastitis with reference to dry cow therapy, nutrition supplement, and pre and post teeth dipping. Okay, here, what I have suggested to you is that number one, teeth dipping is important, but then you must also tell to farmer that teeth dipping is like using Bisleri water, bottled water. If you are using it, you will have to use it continuously. So if you have used for 3 months and then suddenly you go out, in dhaba or in some street vendor and drink that water, then you suffer from huge gastroenteritis. So same thing will happen here also. If you suddenly stop, using this, especially if it is germicidal, you are going to end up, with lots of problems. So tea dipping, of course, has to be emphasized, and all those farmers who have used tea dip have been able to, control, clinical mastitis to a very large extent. But if you would like to, control intramammary infections, reduce your somatic cell count under the conditions, sanitary conditions, in India or, with our rural farmers, I usually advise a selective approach to dry cow therapy, because giving strategic treatment, dry cow therapy becomes very, very expensive, because you have to give 4 vials, each vial is costing so much, it becomes very expensive. So what I suggest is that if you have done at least 3 times somatic cell count during the lactation period, then you can identify animals with high somatic cell count as the high risk cases where dry cow therapy will be administered. So you can administer dry cow therapy. Now, when you are administering dry cow therapy, please avoid any therapy which is having long-term release of antibiotic. That is going to be harmful, as I have already told you. So go for something which has got a sealant activity. Now, as far as the nutritional management is concerned, I think calcium is one of the important element. Phosphorus is another important element. So calcium, phosphorus, as well as zinc, these are 3 important elements which will decide the nutritive approach to mastitis, because a lot of smooth muscle contractions, the sphincters intactness will depend on the calcium, phosphorus. So you'll have to also basically give attention to the calcium, phosphorus which you are going to give, and the nutritional and the mineral supplement. Don't settle for mineral supplement which is spurious, because it's very cheap. You can consider what they must be using, what is their bioavailability, what kind of calcium is being used. So all those questions, because we are vet, we are trained for 6 years and more, and therefore we need to ask these questions to the company which is marketing. Don't accept any claim which they make you. Never be passive. Ask them 10 questions. If this is calcium, do you have any data to support on how much of that is absorbed? What is the salt you are using? Is it calcium gluconate, calcium chloride, calcium carbonate? What is bioavailability? So all those questions need to be asked to understand whether if farmer is spending 50 rupees from his pocket, it should be well spent money. Then what is the treatment and management of gangrenous mastitis in cattle? Oh, so this is a question which is very difficult to answer, because it develops so rapidly, and therefore you have to be very, very alert. Honestly, once there is gangrenous mastitis, very difficult to treat, because it's not only local inflammation, but it is also toxemic infection, because there are lot of toxins that are released which will be circulated even in blood. So it becomes very difficult. So therefore the vet and the farmer has to be very alert. I usually tell practitioners that if there is a case of clinical mastitis reported by the farmer, at least ask him to send a photograph of the udder. And the moment on photograph, if you see that there is a red ring which is there on the udder or on the teeth canal somewhere, if you see the attachment and some kind of, that is the click that the animal might go into gangrenous mastitis, and therefore you need to act very fast. And there the action has to be a very strong antibiotic to be administered intravenously initially, followed by appropriate dose and appropriate frequency, intramuscular or subcutaneously, taking care of huge inflammation with cold fomentation and other inflammatory agents. That is necessary. If you are not able to act very fast, and once the gangrene develops, is very little that we can do. Noor Alam Tufani, how to manage chronic mastitis in cows? Now, so usually most of the chronic mastitis cases are because of staphylococci, because that is intracellular. And intracellular infections are very difficult to get rid of because you need to push your antibiotic in the cell. And cells are not meant to carry antibiotic inside. They are meant to carry, nutrients inside for synthesis of milk and some other, for their own metabolic maintenance. So it becomes very difficult, to administer anything, intracellular. You have to give it for a longer period of time at a higher dose. So if it is chronic mastitis cases, what I usually do is, I settle for oxytetracycline rather than, others, because I find that if oxytetracycline is given at a higher dose rate, say for example 22 milligram per kg body weight or above, and if that is given for 3 to 5 days, then at least you are sure that your antibiotic is going to get inside the cell at therapeutic concentration, and you will be able to get rid of Staphylococcus infection. So therefore, submitting the samples to understand what is the organism involved, and there don't do only one animal. Always, whenever you are doing antibiotic sensitivity, or you would like to have mastitis cases, investigated cases, also take some milk samples from healthy animals of the same environment. If I have got a farm having 50 animals and 2 animals are suspected of mastitis, I'll collect their milk samples separately, and also 2 from other healthy, and then compare. So you can at least eliminate the common bacterial colonies which is there in the healthy and which is also there in disease, but there are additional colonies which are likely to be pathogenic, and then find out what is the bacterial sensitivity test. So that kind of efforts you will have to take when it comes to chronic mastitis. Next.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So the next series of questions regarding hemogalaxia.
What is the treatment of hemogalaxia in cow? Okay, good question. Now here you must ask 2 questions. First question is whether blood is coming from one quarter or it is coming from all the quarters. Okay. Number 2 question. When you take the milk which is containing blood, and if you keep it for 10-15 minutes, does the cells settle down, or there is no settlement, when there is no sediment, and then it remains uniform? So these are 2 basic questions you must ask. Now, if it is coming from all the 4 quarters, then it's a systemic problem. Okay, and systemic problem is because of diapedesis. And usually this diapedesis happens because of defective coagulation. And I remember there were a few cases reported from Mathura, one of the Gaushalas, where they said that there are lots of cows that are having hemogalaxia, and usually these are happening after parturition, say about 15 days, 21 days or 1 month after parturition. And there what you can do is you can do clotting time. And for doing clotting time, there is a simple thing which you can do: collect blood without any anticoagulant, keep it for 12 minutes. If it doesn't clot, then it's a clotting disorder. Add 1 drop of calcium. If it clots, it's because of calcium. And in that case, I advise you give intravenous calcium as well as intramuscular calcium. The hemogalaxia will immediately subside, and then you'll have to revert back to what calcium you're feeding, and the calcium has to be properly administered orally. Okay, like dicalcium phosphate, etc. Now, if there is no settlement and if it remains uniform, then it is not diapedesis, it is hemogalaxia. I mean hemogalaxia, but because of presence of hemoglobin. And there it is because of hemolysis. That is of course not so common. Hemoglobin getting filtered through the other tissue and coming into milk is not very common. Usually it is diapedesis and presence of blood, but it is very likely. So you have to eliminate hemoglobin also, and for that, if there is no sediment in hemoglobin, it is hemolytic. So you'll have to find out what is the hemolytic episode. Is it Babesia, or it is Anaplasma, or some other like Leptospira or some other organisms that are involved. Okay, and then accordingly you'll have to treat. If it is coming only from one quarter, then it is some kind of injury, and there you'll have to find out what is the kind of injury. So some kind of coagulant, whether you can see that injury or not, that you'll have to find out, or some coagulant, like the normal, that is available, that can be administered. Dr. MD Aman, what is efficiency of current vaccines against mastitis available in other countries? Oh, not much. Because now people realize that mastitis basically is a localized infection. So local immunity is important rather than humoral immunity. And therefore now there is a group which is trying for local immunity, where they would like to administer a vaccine intramammary to produce local immunity and see whether it will prevent. But as I have told you, that you already have microbiome, which is your first defense mechanism. So if you are able to have strategies not to disturb your microbiome, they are going to act like a vaccine. They will not allow other pathogenic bacteria to grow. But as yet there is no vaccine that is available. But in one of the experiments I have seen, we were doing some hyperimmunization protocols in case of cows, and we were using E. coli as a repeated immunization bacteria, and there we found that the mastitis because of E. coli were less because of the humoral response to repeated injections. It was not vaccination, it was hyperimmunization. So there is some role to be played by humoral response, but the predominant role is of cellular immunity. Therefore, vaccine is not going to be much help, at least in the shape which is currently available. How is it possible to get these polymers or a Baridip or a green tea cell? Please write to me. I will be able to give you samples for trials. Okay, and I have already displayed my email address, or you can also write to the admin of this webinar, and they will be able to share my email address, and you can write to me, and I'll be able to help you with both the milk tea dip as well as the Baridip. What treatment would you suggest for acute mammalitis, buffaloes, maybe herpes, as there is sudden severe swelling of teeth and teeth bases? Okay, I have been very fortunate to handle a number of outbreaks of herpes mammalitis in buffaloes, and the only thing which I have found work, I think there are only two approaches which is going to help here. Number one approach is you can use povidone iodine. That works extremely well in case of herpes mammalitis. So you have to do dipping 3 to 4 times. That is number one. Number two, ascorbic acid, vitamin C, is also virucidal. So 20% ascorbic acid to be applied on the teeth at least 3 to 4 times would also rapidly heal the infection, and it will also kill viruses, so that the transmission of infection to others will be less. But the problem with ascorbic acid is that it is not stable. So therefore, the solution which can be in applicable form is not currently available. We are trying to look at the stability issues, but till that time, even if you can have ascorbic acid powder with you, and prepare this 20% solution somewhere around 15 to 20%, because it's not something very harmful. So, but it's only acidic, so don't go beyond 20%. So ascorbic acid, and then prepare a solution immediately before use, apply onto the wound. I think that's the best treatment. And and if animal is having fever, you can give antipyretic, but I usually don't prefer antipyretic treatment in inflammation, because I don't want to interfere in the immune response, because fever is one of the immune responses. If you feel there could be some secondary infection, you can also give antibacterial or apply some kind of antibiotic ointment on it. Then what is the management of thelitis in buffaloes? This again, thelitis, I think you're talking about same thing like mammalitis only, or thelitis, you're talking about the inflammation which has resulted in fibrous occlusion, like space occupying region. in that case, the surgical removal becomes important. Don't depend on those kind of enzymes, etc., because the fibrous tissue is such a tough tissue to be dissolved with enzymes. So surgically you can remove.
I would like to invite Mr. P. Karunanidhi for closing remarks before we proceed to vote of thanks. Karunanidhi, sir, please.
Thank you, sir. Samad sir, for wonderful presentation. And all the participants must have observed it is not an ordinary presentation. Normally, experts will come and speak about the treatment options and preventive options based on the existing drug. Whereas today, Dr. Samad has explained not only the existing drug, also what is the possible preventive method for the future based on his research work. So that is the trademark quality of Dr. Samad sir. So for all the participants, during this corona period, we have been arranging many webinars. Our endeavor will be to arrange similar type of webinars with high quality experts and a different subject which is having a pressing requirement in the field. It will not be like normal Me Too webinar. We will not do. We will try to do the best webinars in coming months and with the speakers like Dr. Samad sir. So thank you very much for participating, and over to Dr. Santosh.
Thank you, sir.
I would also like to thank the participants as well as Mr. Karunanidhi, Santosh Shinde, and Alembic, for giving me this opportunity to interact, with professional colleagues. I always, feel very happy, when I'm able to share, what R&D, I am doing, with the participants, and you have been a catalyst to, give me a platform. So for that, I'm very thankful to you, as well as thankful to the participant, because I think it's almost 2 hours now, and they have been, I think, patiently listening. So they are more than I think, students. Students get bored after 45 minutes; they become very impatient. And these participants were very patiently listening to what I wanted to share. For that, I am also thankful to them. Over to you, Shinde.
Welcome, sir.
Warm and graceful afternoon to Honorable Samad sir and all the participants. It is my privilege to propose vote of thanks speech, especially for my advisor, guru, cum mentor, Dr. Samad sir, and acknowledge the contribution of those who really work hard to make this webinar successful. On the behalf of all the participants, Alembic Pharmaceutical Limited, myself, Dr. Santosh Shinde, express my sincere gratitude to Honorable Samad sir for such an informative and applied presentation on update of treatment and control of mastitis. Sir, your presentation will definitely help field veterinarian, student, faculty, and researcher, so that they are already updated the knowledge of prevention, treatment, and control of mastitis. That will definitely help to do their day-to-day practice. Sir, in future also, we would like to take such a benefit of such interesting topic in future also, so that we can upgrade our knowledge and we can serve the society. So in future also, we wanted to have a few webinar with you, sir. Last but not least, I would like to thank all the participants, Mr. P. Karunanidhi sir for continuous guidance and support, Mr. R.K. Sharma, AGM Sales, and entire Alembic field staff, and from my team, Dr. Naresh Kulkarni, Gangadhar Thomre, Sanjay Latkar, and Amish Singh for making this webinar successful. Thank you once again for Honorable Samad sir and all the participating veterinarians. Thank you very much.
And Santosh, tell the participant that all their questions will be answered, even if I was not able to address them here. Send all the queries to me, and individual queries I will answer, so that you can send them through email. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much.
Sure, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.